Oh, are you?
I know that
Very low gas.
I don't even know how much
Certain questions will be direct answers, and then of course, we will be thinking. When it says times that, but if you have more to say, of course, yes. Of course, if you feel like. What is the hard just wait it down. Yes, there will be and then the individual students. Thank you. You're allowed to it's how it's already already there.
No, they just take it for the camera. Oh, yeah.
Oh, he's right. Thank you.
No, these cool kids are in the back. So.
day and good morning. I am Tasha Wade, the event chair for this Medical Marijuana Policy Forum. I would like to welcome and thank everyone for attending this Medical Marijuana Rulemaking Forum that was organized by the Master of Public Administration Administrative Law class of Professor Ron Uggen. This forum is a continued conversation from the 2014 Administrative Law class. This is a historic forum in that we will be discussing the implementation of a medical marijuana program that was approved by a majority of Guam voters in last November's election. I would like to extend a sincere welcome to our panelist members who will be introducing themselves shortly. I would like to also point out, and Director Gillen will re-emphasize this, that the Department of Public Health and Social Services, along with the Medical Marijuana Advisory Board, are still formulating the rules and regulations. Many of the issues we'll discuss today are a work in progress and may change. This forum shall be construed as an unofficial discussion with input from the public and students of the University of Guam. And before we get started, I would like to thank my fellow classmates for their hard work in orchestrating this forum. I also want to thank our professors, Professor Ron Uggen, Dr. McNinch, Dr. Walter, Dr. Rivera, and Dean Saunders, and the other faculty members of the School of Business and Public Administration for their guidance and support.
I speak too loud, so maybe I don't need this microphone. But my name is Ansita, and I'm associate professor here at the University of Guam. When this way approached me to be one to welcoming remarks, and I look at her, I said, "Maybe you made a mistake. I'm from Chu, and the reason why I was saying that because I'm 70 years old, and I'm a recovering politician. And when you give us that opportunity to speak, we speak for 2 hours. And we love to do that. But I know I'm in Guam. I'm shifting. I'm in a new environment. And si Baba Sats ka sa mga kaibigan. Si Bediroran, Hiroradat, Hirokun, Hirokuam. Special respect to the Governor of Guam. I saw you for Mr. Justice. I speak Bruce, and I also see former speakers and others. The chairman of the Board of Regents for the University of Guam and members of the board, President Underwood, Vice President Enriquez, Dean, Dr. Santos, Professor Robin, and the students that put together this forum. You do very good that we can see how pretty you are in politics. My chairman, Dr. Martinez, Dr. Rivera, my chairman also, parents, students, honor guests, and most especially the members of the dialogue we have here this morning. Tony Flores, my friend Andrews, Chief Bodario, Mr. Killian, Dr. Papakwa, Dr. Bose, and Mr. Sabna. I remember when I was attending one of the graduation ceremonies, and our president was talking about what it means to be in Manila. And I remember that because he said, Manila is a village. Mani is village, now is the place of learning, of knowledge, of history. And I look at it, how appropriate it is, how fitting it is to be here today and to hear distinguished members of this panel to share with us new areas of knowledge, new areas of research, from their areas of experience, which will very much define the meaning of perception of reality for Guam. And I really hope it's for the region. And it is an important day. And I hope we have to listen carefully. Because we will learn the ingredients of knowledge and understanding. And if we do, it's going to be good for us. And not only for us today, but for those in the years to come. Let me just share with you a very brief quotation from Peter Drucker, and that is the father of modern management. And he said, you cannot predict the future, but yes, you can create a very good future. And again, that's why we pay respect to the members of the panel. Thank you very much for accepting the invitation. It's an honor to have you here. Ladies and gentlemen, it is with distinct pleasure and honor that we welcome you to the University of Guam and to our forum on the Leon Maluana. Mr. Jabur, Mr. Rande.
Okay, good morning again. Thank you, Dr. Walter. My name is Matthew Maza. I was voluntold to MC today's event, so I will do as well as I can on such short notice. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge some of the people who are in the audience. Of course, our panelists, they will be introducing themselves shortly. I know we have a few former senators and current senators. We have Vice Speaker Cruz, former Speaker San Augustine, former Senator Jesse Mahan. We have Ms. Young Guerrero from the Governor's Office. We have representatives from a whole bunch of island businesses and sectors of the community. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. It's a great turnout. It's a very fast put together event, but I think it's coming along very nicely. A few housekeeping rules. The restrooms are located, men's is on this side of the atrium, women's is on that side. There's blue arrows that point toward our there's food and drink in the room 150. Just follow the blue arrow and let you point you in that direction. There's also a live feed there, so if you feel like going over there and having a snack, you can watch the forum while you're over there. There are lovely ladies in the audience. Please raise your hands that are collecting. They are giving out pieces of paper. If you have a question, please write them down, and we will do our best to get all those questions presented to the panel. Versus you guys standing up and yelling out with our microphone, because our microphones are limited. At this point, one further thing, this is kind of important, because this is on a live stream, please try to not log on to the UOGPS Wi-Fi, because we want to make sure that we record this and it's streamed over the internet. And we want to make sure everyone that's not here gets to see it. Or if they're watching it somewhere else, or in the room over there. At this point, to keep things going along, we would like to allow the panelists to introduce themselves, beginning with Mr. Sablan on my immediate left and going down.
Yes. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Sablan from the Department of Agriculture. I am the Deputy Director. And it is an honor and privilege to be part of the advisory panel. Do I really need a mic? No. Nancy Juice, Legacy Holiday. My name is Jerry Joe. See that? I'm the Director of Public Health and Social Services, and our department has been passing rules and regulations together. Very happy to be here. Great setting.
Good morning. I'm Andy Andrews. I'm Executive Director
of the Employers Council. Thank you for allowing me to visit with you this morning. I think this is a very important subject for everyone to be involved in. So again, thank you. I look forward to participating in this.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Stephanie Flores. I'm the Chief of Staff for Senator Tina Moving Barnes. She's the main sponsor of the Kin KC Conception Compassionate Campus Use Act of 2013. I'd like to take 1 minute to recognize KC's dad, Mr. Kin Conception, who is here today. And I graduated from the University of Guam in 1995, so it's great to be back here. And when I was at UOG, this building wasn't here. All we had was the A building, the B building, and the temporary buildings over there, and the old student center, which is still there, which is still the administration building. Then in 1995, I got my law degree in Thomas Cooley in Michigan, and practiced for a number of years, and now I'm at the legislature with Senator Barnes. And did a great experience crafting this law and making it, seeing it up to where we're at today, which is the implementation phase with people like Dr. Gillum and Mr. Gillum and his environmental health group, who have done an excellent job in the first draft. It was up all night reading it. So, I'm ready for your question.
Good morning, everyone. Hafade. My name is Fred Berdalio. I'm the Chief of Police for the Guam Police Department. I'm happy to be here and appreciate the invitation to discuss important issues of the medical marijuana in the medical marijuana forum. I've worked with the Guam Police Department for over 29 years. I've also served in various branches of the military. I was in the Marine Corps for 7 years. I was in corrections, and then I also worked in the U.S. Navy Reserves, and I also completed 6 years in the Army Reserves. So I've had a lot of experience in working with some organizations, especially the military organizations, which of course is probably going to come up in the forum about drug-free workplace and how we regulate that. The Guam Police Department, again, I'm on my 5th year as the Chief of Police. Our role as law enforcement, officers and in an organization is just to enforce the law, make sure that people comply with the law. These are going to be some of the other issues that I think is going to be expected here. But I really, I'm glad and happy to see fellow Tricans that graduated here from the University of Guam that are engaging in some of this important issue. I've had an opportunity to graduate from the University of Guam while I was in the Guam Police Department. There's so many things that are happening in our community. This is one big significant change that is taking place. I've had an opportunity also while getting my degree here at the University of Guam was actually getting another degree at the University of Oklahoma in human relations. And a lot of the discussion sometimes is broad in human relations that as we look at the challenges that happens in every community. We talk about cultural diversity, different values that happen, and how to keep the health and welfare of the community. And then, of course, I had an opportunity to just recently completed graduate studies at the Naval Postgraduate School. When you get into homeland security, that's another secondary mission that law enforcement agencies have. And we key off, in terms of the Guam Police Department, on a lot of policies and what takes place in the federal government too, both in the homeland security realm and law enforcement realm. So I'm eager to wait for some of the answers, and I'm sure that this will be very productive and a learning experience for everyone. Thank you.
Hello. Is this working? Yeah. I was told to use the microphone because of the live. My name is Laura Post. I am a medical doctor. I've been in this region for about 20 years. I started in Sacramento. The books in front of me, I brought for 2 purposes. Primarily, mostly to show you 2 things. How seriously we are taking this issue. The people have spoken, the law has been passed, but it's a contentious issue. There are a lot of arguments against medical marijuana. There are a lot of arguments against recreational marijuana. There are a lot of issues to be worked out to set up a process by which, as this goes forward, the medical marijuana gets to the right people, not to children, not diverted to people who are going to resell it on the street, and not in medical ways that aren't helpful. And so that's one thing. And the second thing is medically, and I know the medical doctor here today, a lot of the decisions come down to individual opinion as this goes through, and you have a patient that you're working with. You need to know a lot about them. You need to know their history. You need to do a physical examination. You need to order laboratory tests. You need to know what other medicines they're taking. You need to know what other illnesses they may have. And so just from simply a medical perspective, it's quite complicated. The books I brought, general medicine, pharmacology is how substances move through the body. Most of our bodies are water, some of it is fatty, and some medicines move better through the fatty part and into the brain than others do. And some forms of medicines move better through the fatty part into the brain than others do. As a simple example, there are a lot of medicines that lower blood pressure, but the only one that crosses through the blood-brain barrier is actually called Ingerol or propranolol. All the other ones stay in the rest of the body. So that's something that needs to be considered when looking at formulations of medical marijuana. Neurology, being subject of contention. Medical marijuana, any kind of marijuana, is a substance that you put in your body. It has effects in the brain. It has effects in many parts of the brain. Some of the effects are not very good. And the people who are against marijuana or medical marijuana are going to focus on the toxic effects of the medical marijuana. And so knowing a little bit about the brain is very helpful. And as far as these books go, almost all general doctors will know this part. These are my specialties. Substance abuse, we don't want to create addicts. If we do create addicts by accident, we want to have a place to refer them so they can get help and not be addicted actively anymore. Pain management, key to the topic of medical marijuana. It's primarily for pain, but it's to reduce a number of other conditions at which it's very effective. But pain is very complex. And I'll come back to that if I have a chance. And lastly, forensic psychiatry, which overlaps Chief Bordalio and the whole issue of officers on the street, driving while intoxicated, used to only refer to alcohol. Now it's going to refer to marijuana as well. But there's no breathalyzer for marijuana, so how do we deal with that? I hope that there are lots of contentious questions today. We're not here to convince you of anything. We're not here to help you make up your minds. We're here to answer questions, and comparably, the other panelists could have their own piles of books about the law and policing and agriculture. And so you would see in front of you a bunch of people who have a lot of experience and a lot of this, and it's going to take all of us working together. I'm sorry that Dr. Babakwa is not here because his pile of books is different than everyone else's pile of books. To do this properly, California did it wrong. And if we get a chance to talk about that. The way they've set it up is that people don't go to the dispensaries because they risk getting robbed when they come out. There might be a dispensary on one corner, and there might be a different dispensary on another corner. And if you go to one, then the gang running the other dispensary will approach you and say, how come you didn't come to my dispensary? Why are you going there? So I've actually done some research on this. I've seen some dispensaries, and you couldn't pay me money to go into most of the ones in California, even if I were in terrible certificate to get one. So I obviously can talk for quite a while. That's all I'm going to say for now. They're also showing me the time card. I suspect that I was close to that. They're probably going to show me that several times during the course of this. But this is a passion of mine. This is very important. And we need your questions and concerns and feedback to help us do the policies properly. So thank you to all the people who helped set it up. I'm not going to repeat everybody's names. Thank you to all of you who came on Saturday. It's a beautiful day outside. Let's pretend it's raining outside and you have nothing better to do. Thank you to everyone who's asked questions and who's going to ask a question. Thank you to the panel in advance for all the hours I know we're going to be spending together. And thank you for coming and for listening.
Thank you so much. Dr. Babakwa will be here. He's actually running a little bit late. He let us know that he'll be here in a little while. So he will be joining us. Before we move on, I'd like to acknowledge a few other individuals who showed up. Senator Jim Espodan is here. Also we have Mr. Brian Nicholas, which is Governor Cabo's Special Assistant on Health from the Governor's Office. He's here as well. At this point, when we contacted Director Gillen, we let him know that we would like for him to present a little bit on the status of the rulemaking procedures thus far, if he was able to. As you all know, Department of Public Health and Social Services is the lead agency with the advisory board to promulgate the rules and regulations of this program. So, a few minutes to provide a short presentation. Yeah. It's on.
I really don't like working with the microphone. Irish, both hands. Speak. These are the draft regulations. Just got finished yesterday and were sent to the advisory board. This is just the first cut. Okay? This is 133 pages. A lot of it we relied on the state of Arizona, but we also made it apply to Guam where we had to. Still a lot of work. Okay? We have a lot of stakeholders we have to get involved in this before we even have our administrative adjudication policy. Excuse me if I don't recognize it, so I think that's okay, right? I thought initially when this thing passed, and Mr. Concepcion, this is a compassionate act. It does deal with hopefully delivering a product to people who, regardless of what medical application is going to apply, they have not been able to manage their pain and they're stuck with a life on opioids and vegetables. They just don't have a decent life as they pass. This has the potential to, at least in the terminal stages, make life a little bit more bearable. You can die dignity rather than be afraid to live. There are other applications that are still yet to be tested. The Medical Society and the Medical Association need more testing, but I will tell you, that train left the station, folks. We're doing this. We're going to do it, but we're going to do it right. We're going to make sure that we can regulate. We're going to make sure that this doesn't get out on the street. There's minimal possibility for a gray market in this business as we can. And, I'm sure you MBA folks, know that you've got to do an environmental scan. You've got to look at the effects of what you do. It's like dropping a pebble in a pool. All of those rings just keep going out and out. Well, this one is like dropping a pebble. Dropping a pebble, and then people dropping more pebbles. It just gets so complicated. It's incredible. I thought all we were going to do is just grow this and distribute. I just wanted to show you, I was just playing with this the other day because I never really thought about it. And you'll forgive me because I never learned how to do writing and stuff the correct way. Sister Mary Catherine's still upset with me. 500 times 12. That's the estimated number of patients who could qualify. That's the number of ounces of marijuana be available per month. This is our estimate of the cost right now for an ounce. Now you know why so many people want to be my friend. That's $90 billion, folks. And there are a lot of good things that come out of that money, there are a lot of bad things that come out of it. Just to say that impact alone, we have people in Asia who are interested in coming here because they can't get access to this product. There's a lot of things that are surrounding this that are still yet to be dealt with and described, and even the banking part of it. When we start our series of stakeholder meetings, we hold public meetings, we have, I think, about 12 or 13 organizations and parties that are going to be affected by this: GPD, GFD, Hotel Restaurant Association, Department of Justice. I have a list. There's just so many people that we have to get involved in this first cut. Okay? We will have the public hearings. We'll have a series. It's not just going to be a one-time shot. We want to get as much input as possible. We want to get this thing right. Something I thought was going to be relatively easy. Eat.
Thank you, Director Gillen. At this point, we will proceed to the question and answer portion of the forum. The way the class did it, oh, by the way, this is Mr. Uggen. He's our professor. I want to acknowledge him. And he really pushed us to get this going and to get it going right. So we're very appreciative of all his encouragement. So we're going to go to the question and answer portion. And the way the class did it is we all kind of sat down and we brainstormed questions. And we came up with a list of questions. Some of these questions, actually most of them, are kind of directed towards individual members of the panel because of their expertise and their role in the government and the community. But of course, anyone would else who would like to interject and add their opinion from the panel are more than welcome. So I guess to it. The first question are mainly public safety questions. So these are directed more towards Chief Verdalio, if anything. And the first question by one of our classmates was, is GPD going to maintain a database for individuals who are medicinal marijuana patients or something to that nature?
My answer to that is definite no. The Guam Police Department will not maintain or establish a database for patients of medical marijuana. Important reason, you know, the Guam Police Department is not engaged in any kind of domestic intelligence. You know, that this is the scope of health type of information. The Guam Police Department in criminal intelligence database of information is very regulated. There are federal laws that are involved in terms of establishing a database. So that answer again is a definite no.
Anyone else would like to add to that, or okay. Next question. So what we'll do here is we'll ask a question of one panelist, and then we will kind of cycle through and then go back, so that everyone, we're having the opportunity to speak and we'll get through as many questions as possible. The next question we would like to ask direct to Dr. Post. Can you address the pharmacological aspect of marijuana that is low in THC and high in CBD as it relates to treatment for epilepsy? This was someone had a very specific question regarding that.
This is a very specific question. Well, let me back up a second. Marijuana is a plant. Marijuana grows, it tends to grow in tropical and subtropical places. If you think of the names of the kinds of street pot that were available, Maui, Wowie, I don't know if anyone calls them. Tijuana Gold. However, there are two different species of marijuana. One is called cannabis. My glasses, I'm missing the essential part because my ate my real glasses and answered this. Without the glasses, I couldn't answer any questions at all because I can't think if I can't see. One is called cannabis sativa, and the other is called cannabis indica. They look very different. Probably everyone has in their mind an image of what a pot plant looks like, whether you have ever smoked it or not, because it's a pretty prevalent symbol that appears in a lot of places. One is more suited to indoor, one is more suited to outdoor. One has big fat leaves, that's the indica. The sativa has tiny thin leaves. And where I'm going with this is that one of them has more THC, which is tetrahydrocannabinol, and I could draw it for you on board, but you'll obviously come look at the book if you want to know chemically what it looks like. And the other, cannabidiol, is another one of the 80 psychoactive chemicals in the cannabis plant. And they're very different from each other. THC tends to be, as a rule, stimulating. It's the one that causes most of the problem. It can cause psychosis, decreased motivation, paranoia, decreased attention, the couch potato munchies kind of thing. CBD reduces seizures. CBD can actually reduce psychosis. CBD can reduce anxiety. And so as far as certain kinds of epilepsy, both in children and in adults, CBD is proving in some studies overseas and a couple here to be very, very useful. So the answer to the question is there definitely is a role for the kind of marijuana that contains CBD in the treatment of intractable, meaning lots of other medicines and treatments have been tried, childhood epilepsy. Epilepsy is little explosions in the brain and will damage the child's brain, and preventing that is a good thing. So I hope I've answered the question. I beat the time sign.
Thank you. Our next question will be directed to Mr. Andrews. This question came up, it's in regards to if an individual is a medical marijuana patient and they're obviously they have a job. Can private employers, or what are the implications of having a job and having a medical marijuana prescription? Can employers discriminate or implement special conditions regarding an employee with that type of prescription?
Thank you. Briefly, the answer is yes. Hopefully, you ask me what time it is, and hopefully I'm not going to tell you how to make lunch. But I go through all the various articles and reports regarding this kind of subject here, and I kind of boiled it down here. And I'll give you a review of what I found. Maintaining a safe, healthy, and productive environment is crucial for any employer. Indeed, the safety and health of employees, customers, and the public in general is mandated, if not by law, by just sound business practices. Maintaining a drug-free workplace is critical. It is a critical element in maintaining such an environment. Accordingly, the Federal Controlled Substances Act, CSA, stipulates the standards for a drug-free workplace. It criminalizes marijuana and marijuana use. And any place that receives federal funding or is subject to federal regulations requiring the testing of safety-sensitive workers obligates employers to maintain a safe workplace with behavioral standards such as a drug-free workplace policy. Marijuana use is still illegal under federal laws, and some government agencies refuse to accept medical marijuana use to excuse a positive result on a legally mandated drug test. Notably, the U.S. Department of Transportation, DOT,
has repeatedly directed that employers may not accept the use of medical marijuana to explain a positive result on the DOT test. Now, while some states and even the U.S. Department of Justice takes a relaxed approach to enforcement of marijuana laws with regard to marijuana use, medical marijuana use, the U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that users can be criminally prosecuted. Additionally, physicians cannot legally prescribe marijuana under the CSA. Further, one federal appeals court and several district courts have ruled medical marijuana users lack protection from discrimination law because illegal drug use is not protected under the ADA or elsewhere. However, noted that there is an ongoing disability discrimination litigation regarding compliance with reasonable accommodation obligations, typically under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Briefly, the way we see it, interactive dialogue is to take place regarding how the employer may reasonably accommodate the disability itself. It does not have to include dialogue regarding the use of marijuana, which is an illegal drug. And condoning its use would indeed impose an undue hardship on the employer. Simply put, even under statutes directly addressing employment issues, an employer's adverse actions may be sustained in connection with the use of marijuana because it continues to be illegal under federal law. So, in response to the question as to whether or not an employee's employment can be terminated, the answer may well be yes. And regarding as to whether or not medical marijuana use must be accommodated, the answer is no. Then, of course, let me give you a caveat. There are always twists and turns in every case, and being able to address all of them is near impossible, as it is trying to keep up with the overwhelming vast array of regulations pertaining to the workplace with which an employer must contend nowadays. And even as we speak, undoubtedly there's another politician somewhere conjuring up another bridle of the employment process. Be that as it may. Beyond the accommodation process, policy review is prudent to avoid missteps in medical marijuana states. And we should also note that with the likelihood that drug use and abuse will be on the rise, employers who strive to preserve a drug-free environment should increase workplace drug testing and should otherwise not let their testing policy go slack because of changing laws. Of course, this will contribute to the cost of doing business, which inevitably will lead to higher prices and in turn higher cost of living. The cycle goes on. Alternatively, to protect themselves, they may just hire fewer people. And lastly, as a footnote, the question may be asked as to what effect all of the laws and regulations we've discussed may have on investment in job markets. As Jim said, good or bad. So, enough said. Again, thank you for the opportunity to answer this one.
Thank you. Our next question will actually go through a question from the audience. So get your questions in. We're going to kind of be interjecting them throughout the course of the question and answer portion. This one is a two-part question. What is the shelf life for medicinal marijuana? And if adequate research, or if there has been adequate research regarding an acceptable dosage, can you speak to the shelf life and an adequate dosage of medical marijuana? Anybody?
Seem to be kind of looking at me. Adequate shelf life. I have no idea. But give me a minute on my smartphone and I could probably find out for you. I don't know the answer to either of those questions, actually. It's not the area of my expertise, but it's obviously something that we as a group are going to need to deal with. I know there is an adequate shelf life because the active molecules in the marijuana, like active molecules of everything except for some kinds of hamburgers, which apparently have an indefinite shelf life, and you leave them there and they don't degrade or develop mold or anything. Everything degrades in the air. Probably the marijuana that's vacuum sealed, namely the edibles, will have a longer shelf life. Probably the buds and the smokables will have a shorter shelf life. This is actually a question that someone who smokes weed would probably know the answer to. But I don't know the answer to either of those questions, I'm sorry.
That's another question that has to be done as we go through this process. We really don't have the expertise here except for how long it lasts, but usually those uses doesn't last very long either. But probably airtight containers, in a controlled environment. We really don't know yet. This is where we have a gap in our system right now. We can identify the laboratory testing to determine what is the equivalent of 2.5 ounces or 5 ounces, turn into to an edible or to a tincture or to any of these kind of things. All of that still is where we have a big gap in service. And I can't send samples out by them, so we're gonna have to have that expertise here. We contract it, bring it over and get people to help us. That's why I know that the initial $100,000 is definitely not enough money to get this going. We're going to look at $90 million potential gross revenue. We should be able to finance a fairly decent operation. Right now, we just don't have that answer.
I looked it up. Cannabis can be stored for a significant amount of time with little loss in product quality or potency if the storage method is suitable. There is little deterioration of THC over 12 to 18 months if the storage method is in a tightly sealed container or vacuum sealed in a cool, dark, dry, and stable environment. So not on the dashboard, not in your pocket, or keep in the cabinet, which is cool, dark, dry, and stable. So that's the answer. 12 to 18 months if it is protected. I don't know about the plant itself. The plants tend to have different reactions in the humidity that we have here.
And a related issue, can you comment on how long it stays in the system compared to, say, some of the other drugs and substances?
That I do have some expertise in because part of what my office does, I work at a place called Mariana Psychiatric Services that probably most of you have never heard of, which is fine. We treat mostly addicts and we like to keep it low key, so I'm not even going to say where it is. When we test for the different drugs, ice lasts in the system a day or two. Cocaine lasts in the system a day or two. And of course, it depends whether it's eaten, snorted, injected, or smoked. And that's this pharmacology book. How substances get around the body depends on how they get into the body, how well the liver processes elimination of the substances, what other medicines people are taking, how healthy they are, how good their metabolism is. So benzodiazepines like Valium, Klonopin, Ativan, hallucinogens in general like LSD or shrooms, medicines come out, last a day or two in the body. Marijuana is very different because it's fat soluble. So it lives in the fat cells of every person. Even the skinniest, smallest person does have some fat cells. And what that means is that someone who smokes a lot, the marijuana can stay in their system for months. And it's a big issue in the drug testing that we do, because people will repeatedly test positive for marijuana and swear they haven't smoked in weeks. And medically, that's a viable reality. Obviously, bigger people, if they lose weight suddenly as the fat cells shrink, the marijuana will come out of it. So someone might have not smoked for a year, but if they lose a lot of weight, the marijuana will come out and people can test positive for months and months and months after their last use. So it becomes very difficult legally to know how and when to sanction someone for illegal drug use if there's a great variability in how long it can stay in the system. And then the second part of the first question, what doses are useful? That needs to be between the patient and the doctor on an individual basis. But when I visited the distribution center, the dispensary in Colorado when I was at the conference, pretty much everything is in milligrams. And a standard dose for somebody with moderate chronic pain might be 20 or 200 milligrams every few hours. And with more severe pain, it might be 10 times that. But again, it depends on how the person reacts to marijuana, what other medicines they're taking, what it is that's being addressed. MS is very different than restless leg, and restless leg is very different than cancer pain. And cancer pain is very different than post-traumatic stress disorder. It depends on the kind of pain, it depends on the individual person, and that's a decision that's going to need to be made by the prescribing person who's responsible for giving the medical marijuana to the patient.
When we first started talking about this with the executive board of the medical association, there aren't going to be any prescriptions until this thing is moved off Schedule 1. You can't write a prescription. A certification in the medical association is that this patient may benefit from use of marijuana as medicine. And what one doctor has done, his friend practices in the States, basically the certification says, keep using it until it takes effect. So this is a principle called titration. Basically, we've seen people do this. Do that enough until it has effect, and you should be okay. But that's just a real easy way to do it. Once we get science in terms of, again, other types of delivery, we'll get it better and get it tighter. That's the challenge right now. It's basically just use it until it has effect.
Thank you. That was a very spirited discussion. I'm going to ask the next question from the audience because I think this is the most popular question, and I think everyone sitting up there probably knew this question was going to come up. It's a question regarding how many licenses for dispensaries are going to be given out. It basically, in a nutshell, from these 6 or 7 questions is, how many licenses to grow are you going to give out? Can people grow in their homes? And yeah, I mean, I think that's gonna, everyone in the panel knew that question was coming. So if everyone would like to speak on it, that affects agriculture, public health, public safety, policy. So, and of course, health, quality control. And there's even about quality control. How we're gonna make sure that what's being grown is safe. So I open that up to the panel, to everyone.
Okay, first of all, there's no home cultivation. That's clear in the law. That was part of the first draft of the law that was of the bill that was introduced that was debated on the floor of the 32nd Guam Legislature and was removed from that bill. So there is no home cultivation. And insofar as the number of licenses that will be available, I believe that's still part of the rules and regulations process, still being vetted. It's going to be a function, as I understand it, will be a function of the population, the adoption rate of the population. So really you can't have too many licenses if there isn't going to be enough patient base. So it's kind of early in the game to discuss the number of licenses, because that will be also part of the public input portion.
The way we look at it right now, there's not going to be one in every village. And it's just that basic management principle really is KISS. Keep it simple, keep it effective. Okay? And the only way you're going to actually get a handle on regulating and controlling the gray market and all of the things that get loose is that you have to have a fairly small number of production sites and distribution sites. And I know that there's a group of people who are interested in developing this as a small business. And I would say that if you want to do that, you might want to consider a co-op rather than a small little plot somewhere that don't have typical regulated. And I don't want to build another bureaucracy at the Department of Public Health and Social Services that does nothing but go around and look for complaints. If you hide it, absolutely. We don't want to be doing that. So we want to make it simple. We want to make sure that the facilities that are going to be regulated are secure. We talked to Mr. Lustig about possibly growing it on a piece of land, but that's going to be a difficult one. We're really looking at some of the Colorado models where they're actually warehouse facilities with cameras, security gate, guards, and all of these kind of things. That's subject for this whole stakeholder process and the public hearing process. So that's not a done deal. Just please keep in mind that as long as I'm there, I'm really thinking about keeping it as easy as possible to regulate us, but still keep it effective.
Quite simply, let's keep it simple. Number of licenses, none. That's simple.
I just want to say I'm glad that it's going to be regulated and managed, and they keep it simple, because we have Crime Stoppers tips constantly receiving. It says someone's cultivating something here, someone's cultivating marijuana there, and we have to do some verifications. A lot of our work on our narcotics advice watch had to make a lot of verifications. So it is going to be, it's very complex when things are in play to verify if there's already an individual with a license in that. So limiting that is, I think, would be something to, I think, would be good policy, just limiting it and not having it in every single village.
Thank you. The next question we'll direct to Mr. Sablan. What is the Department of Agriculture's role, or what is the perceived role that the Department of Agriculture will play in the drafting and implementation of this program?
Thank you for that. Yes, mainly the department, the role is going to be focused mostly on the producer, not the patient. We will be assisting the program progresses on how we can help with the propagation of medical marijuana, propagation as far as methods, and of course the accountability and assistance with whatever dispensary or facility it's going to be actually facilitated, and well, whatever container as far as the product. Now, our part mainly is to assist with the program on monitoring. If certified farmers are recorded, we'll have also a database on that in accordance with public health.
And we will assist them with the facility security. We do have conservation officers. At the dispensary. But again, for the most part, our role is actually assisting the producers or dispensaries as far as tips on methods on propagation. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question we will be directing to Ms. Flores from Senator Barnes' office. Will the government have to implement, revise, or introduce legislation amending our drug-free workplace policy, whether it's within the government or even to see within the private sector regarding medical marijuana, if someone tests positive for marijuana and they have a prescription, things of that nature?
Okay, I have two bosses who are here, so Vice Speaker Cruz and Senator Espaldon will probably be in a better position to answer that question than I will, but from a common sense perspective, because the law has changed insofar as the medical cannabis program is now available on Guam, it would stand to reason that government of Guam would have to revisit at least and consider if there should be changes to the Guam policy. I will tell you that as part of our committee work, in a going forward basis, looking long term, one of the items we have been researching is in the various states that have medical marijuana programs, what protections have been put in place for patients, qualified patients. And one of the very interesting concepts that we have seen and that is still being researched is your status as just because you are a qualified patient. Absent any other thing, just because you're a qualified patient can't be a basis for termination. So if, for example, in some of the states that we've looked at, they require that the employer has to show that you have been impaired on the job in addition to being a patient. So your status as a patient itself could not be a basis for termination. Just like you would not be able to be terminated just because you're a diabetic, right? So sort of extending that kind of logic to the employment laws and what's available. So just that your status as a patient will not be, this is one of the things that we're actively researching right now. We're not promising any legislation. I can't speak for the legislature in that regard, but it is something that, at least in our committee, we are researching those issues. But because we're still in the rules and regulations development phase, it's a little premature to be doing that. But it is something that is on the radar and we are looking at. So as we go, we want to do this one step at a time and allow the rules and regulations to be developed, see what comes out of those. And then from there, if we need to make changes, then those are things that can be brought back to the legislature.
Thank you. The next question, it will be a question from the audience. We have a lot of questions coming in. Thank you so much. The question reads, it seems as though there is a lack of representation for patients and caregivers other than public hearings. Are there any other options to have better representation to speak for patients? So I guess the gist of the question is, what efforts are going to be made to allow patients and maybe people who are thinking of maybe being a recipient or a user or family members thereof to have a voice?
Again, the difficulty in that one is that people who have that type of interest, especially patients or caregivers, are emotionally involved. And it's going to be very difficult to step back and look at the actual developing the practical way that you're going to deal with getting the product delivered. And I think the bottom line is making sure people in pain, people who have post-traumatic stress, benefit, all of those things, get the product as soon as possible in the safest manner possible. There's nothing wrong with having people's input, and I think the public hearing process is enough. But if you start to get really deeply invested people, emotionally invested people in the rulemaking, you may wind up having a program that's going to be extremely difficult to manage. I know that's a hard thing to hear, but from a very practical management standpoint, we will listen to everybody. We will do what we can to incorporate everybody's concerns. But if you try to keep everybody happy, you get nothing done. That's one thing you learn in your management courses. Don't try to keep everybody happy. You won't get anything done. But we will. And you know, I was here last year when that family had to move to Colorado to make sure that their child got access to what that child needed for their epileptic condition. We want to make sure we can develop all of that, bring it all back home, get our people back here and get them the care that they need. But again, you have to be careful about that emotional investment. We did it at a hearing last week on foster care and land for foster care that can become a very emotional kind of thing. And if we're not careful about how we proceed, just, pardon my expression, just knee-jerk. So everything that gets brought up, we won't get anything done.
Just to add to what Director Gillum was saying, Dr. Bavakwa is the public member. So his role on the advisory board is to represent the public in general. Then you also have the representative of the legislature who's elected by the people. So the public's input is all going to be there. Either you contact a member of the advisory board you're comfortable with, or you talk to Dr. Bavakwa, and his role is really to represent the public at large. So the public's input is very much represented on the board, and that's when the advisory board was put together. It was put together for very specific purposes. And number one was to determine adequate dosage, which is at the very heart of getting the medicine to the people. And number two was to determine what additional conditions could be added. So that's, again, another facet of listening to the patients, what needs to happen, and so it's all a deliberative process.
As I said, once this thing was passed, I found that I had a lot of friends. And there were a lot of people who wanted to talk to me about the whole program. And I kept it at arm's length because a lot of those people could potentially actually be the producers, could be the distributors. Could be, and I don't want anybody to say that this whole process has been tainted by people who have that kind of interest. But if you are a caregiver, if you are a person who has a condition that you think is going to benefit from this, there are any number of people you're welcome to speak to. Okay? As long as we understand that you have no other interest than that. We want to keep this process as squeaky clean as possible, because this is going to be, say, $90 million perhaps. Okay, so there's a lot of people interested in getting in on this. But if you think that even looking at the law now, there are conditions that are not there that should be on the list, talk to Michael, talk to any of us, okay? That's one of the board's functions. But we do want to just make sure we keep it, as I said, on time. That's the reason I don't return phone calls. That's the reason I don't talk to some people who are just not powerful, but we're just not going to do that.
Thank you. The next question is actually a multiple part question. Since one of the things that was brought up was the dosage and getting the medicine to the people, I think it will be an appropriate segue. The question is how, in terms of considering dosage, how will it be administered? Smoked, ingested, such as edibles, things that in the marijuana could consume. And will there be considerations of allowing, let's say, companies to, or local companies to make edibles to be allowed for consumption of or ingestion of medicine?
I feel your gaze upon me again. It's going to be a medical decision how the effective molecules of the marijuana get into the system. Someone who smoked weed as a younger person and now has cancer might be comfortable smoking weed again. someone who's never smoked, we probably don't want to get them started smoking because anything you smoke can have a bad effect on the lungs, ranging from cancer and emphysema. And you don't want to create a problem where one didn't exist before. This is meant to be a helpful product, not a harmful one. The edibles that I saw at the dispensary in Colorado, it was more like a candy store than a medical marijuana dispensary. They have chocolate bars that are divided like certain brands into little squares that you can break off, and each one has a certain amount of THC in it. How that's going to be determined, how much it is, and how the edibles are made, we still need to figure out. Because we're so isolated and remote, we can't just send it to somebody because that's clearly a federal violation. Because it still is federally substance out of the territory to someone else. So yes, all the edibles are going to have to be made here, but the ones I saw included probably 5, 10 different kinds of candy bars, gum, mints, lollipops, and probably any other kind of, they had brownies, they had cookies, and I didn't obviously taste any of them, but I did ask some of the people who were there buying, and let me hang around for quite a while and ask lots of questions. They said, yeah, it really tastes like a brownie. It's not like the old hash brownies where you feel like you're eating dirt and sticks. It actually is a liquid THC that's blended with the brownie mix, et cetera, et cetera. So these are quite sophisticated edibles, and the method of how the patient gets it is a medical decision based on how bad their pain is, what their tolerance is. Something that's smoked gets in much faster than something you eat that has to go through the whole digestive system, esophagus, stomach, and then it starts getting reabsorbed in the small intestines. That takes much longer. That also will depend on patient preference. It'll depend on who the caregiver is and what their schedule is like. If someone can come in 3 times a day, then we're going to find a way to give it to the patient 3 times a day. It's really going to be a very individual decision, and I'm hoping that we're going to be collecting data prospectively to find out which ways seem to work the best, what people prefer, maybe by classification or category of the qualifying illness or syndrome that someone has. You know, maybe smoking is better for MS, and maybe lollipops are better for restless leg syndrome or whatever. But it's going to be a medical decision, and as far as the manufacture part, I can't speak to that because that's manufacturer. I'm not any kind of cook at all.
Again, part of our program in environmental health is the food product cosmetic category. This has raised a lot of concern with my friend Tom Nadeau. We start talking about packaging and labeling, and you know that stuff starts to look like candy and cookies, and you've got children around, and how you protect that. But it's like any other drug. You have to make sure you keep it away from children. We have more accidental poisonings and deaths from misuse of opioids. You know, so I still think that marijuana is probably a more viable alternative to some of these things. We might get a child that might have a toxic reaction, but is not going to die. If we are responsible parents, we'll make sure that that stuff is not going to be out. Because it is very effective. Some of the packaging, I'm sure some of you are seeing online. It really is. I mean, gummy bear, marijuana, I love it. That whole idea, you know, is but again, I can see a terminal, you know, cancer patient who's never smoked, who's not going to be able to take the marijuana by smoking. Okay, we can do an infusion, maybe it's the old omniptamine, they used to infuse with some of that, I'm told. You know, so there are ways to get it to the patient, but I think that's the next step. This is, you know, again, getting this all together, you know, so that when we roll it out, and when these people are licensed and when the distributors are licensed, all of that is going to be good. So please be patient because we want to do it right. I know everybody thinks, okay, 9 months from now we're all going to spark up, and you know, everybody's going to be, you know, pain-free, but we want to do it so that the patient who really needs it gets it the best way possible.
Thank you. Wow, we have a lot of questions up here. Let me go to another question generated by our class, so we can try to get a wide breadth of questions. This is a public safety question. We all know we face a lot of DUIs, a lot of driving under the influence on Guam. So this question is directed towards the chief. During routine traffic stops, will officers, as a matter of protocol, ask a driver if they have a medical marijuana prescription or something to that effect?
That's not going to be the protocol for police officers when they conduct a routine traffic stop. You know, the policy and the way the protocol of our officers when they conduct a traffic stop, it's for observing a traffic violation, and it would have nothing to do with trying to probe and ask the operator if they have any kind of medical illness or if they have any kind of medicine that they're taking. So, you know, and when we come down to also DUI enforcement, because, you know, a lot of the majority of the data shows that a lot of the arrests are alcohol related. We have an implied consent law. So if an officer doesn't detect alcohol, but suspects just by the operator's mannerism, his behavior, how he looks like he's not coordinated and might be under the influence of a drug, there's a particular portion of the standard sobriety test where they'll be able to, it gives a clue whether the individual may be under the influence of a drug. Just a clue, but the real thing is actually if an arrest is made and having them submit to a drug test, and that's done at the hospital, that would probably be detecting, you know, if he was under influence for in this particular sense, marijuana. But it's, I do expect that as, you know, this community, of course, medicinal use of marijuana, I know that people will be responsible and know, especially the people who are taking the medicine, that they know that they just can't be impaired, you know, because that's the whole thing about why we want our highways and roadways to be safe. That if you know you're taking any kind of narcotic substance or any medications, that if it impairs your driving and it results in someone getting hurt, then, you know, people will demand justice, you know. So again, back to this basic question, we're not going to be, it's not a protocol of the Guam Police Department that be asking people if they have, if they've taken any medicines. When they're suspecting an individual's driving manner is impaired because they got involved and people observe them, you know, lane straddling, then of course, an officer will just be asking, have you, you know what, if they don't smell any alcohol, they'll be asking, have you taken any kind of drugs, or are there any drugs in this vehicle? That's one of the routine things that police officers do, but they won't be zeroing in on marijuana on patients who are under taking medicine, marijuana. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question. We have a few questions here regarding the model that was used to come up with the draft rules. One of the questions, I'll just ask both at the same time. What factors were involved in deciding to follow the Arizona model? And then the other question is, was the Washington State model or program not considered?
Okay, the reason the Arizona model was chosen is because Will Humble is my friend. He was at that time the director of the Arizona Department of Health Services. And he was giving me a good deal on the source code that we'll need to run our web-based application process. The state of Arizona spent over $800,000 to develop their system, and he's given it to us for free. So that's a pretty good price. He also is of the same mindset, keep it as simple as possible. Don't hire a lot of folks to run this process. Just get it out, get it done. He's still there. Now he's at the university as a professor of ed sound. He's still supporting us. We'll be sending 3 people next month early to get actual hands-on with the regulatory aspect and also the information technology part. We've looked at other states. We haven't just, this is not, you don't just open up Arizona state code and look at that and say, oh, that's Guam's too. We've looked at other states. Some things didn't make sense for us from Arizona that, so we borrowed. So there's any number of states that you can do. Massachusetts has a program, but right now they're in trouble. So I don't know what they did. But, we looked around to see what works. Washington, again, all of those folks I've worked with in the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, any one of them we could have chosen, but Bo was the first one who stood up and said, whatever you need, we'll do it for you. So that's why we did it.
And just to give you an interview, when we were doing the draft of the legislation, we did a survey of the different states, and Arizona was one of the statutes that we looked at very heavily. And the statute that we actually very closely mirrored was New Mexico. And New Mexico and Arizona statutes are almost identical. There are very minor changes, so if you're concerned about does the Arizona rules really, are they too far away from our statute or not? I'll tell you that when you look at the Arizona law and you look at the Guam law, they're very, very similar. So the logical choice was to go with a state that was closely related to the statute that we have. And Arizona is very close. So doing rules and regulations that are consistent with our statute, Arizona is a nice starting point.
Thank you. The next question, we're trying to get through these as quickly as possible because there are a lot. It's another employer-employee relations question. Should employers be required or encouraged to provide reasonable accommodations for medical marijuana users now that we're implementing a program?
I think I addressed this earlier. The issue is the employer, if there is a disability issue, they are to enter into an interactive dialogue with the employee to see if they may reasonably accommodate the disability. Reasonable accommodation, or as we can tell through all the court cases, does not include the use of marijuana in any form. You can discuss reasonably accommodating the disability, but the use of marijuana is still illegal. It would impose an ownership on the employer. We cannot condone the use of an illegal drug. Sorry, that's what it is.
I'd like to add another point to think about to that, which is that under the Americans with Disabilities Act, addiction, active addiction, someone who's actively using illegal drugs or using legal drugs illegally, like stealing grandma's Percocet from her medicine chest, is not covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Someone who is in rehabilitation or in recovery who is not actively using and who is actively pursuing a clean and sober life and is not impaired by the disability is covered by the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, the wrinkle in this is that marijuana is still illegal. But basically, this medical marijuana process, this law that we have here in the territory, means that for individual consumption as approved by one group of people, as prescribed by a different group of people, I believe ought to be protected. And I will just say that many people with chronic pain who are presently taking opiates, which are legal drugs, could be impaired by the opiates. And if they're impaired, that's a problem. But if they're taking the medicine as prescribed, and they're not having sedation side effects or incoordination side effects or confusion side effects, and they're not abusing it, they're not using it in an addictive way, there isn't any issue at all. And I see this case with the medical marijuana as more like that. And I think it does need to be, I think we need to take into consideration that it's meant to be a medicine, and that we're not talking about creating a population of addicts who are going to come into the workplace and sell weed, take time away from their regular jobs, go back outside in the jungle and smoke weed. This is a medical issue. I'm a medical doctor and not a human resources person. But this is the kind of discussion that faces this advisory board in the future, because I'm sure we're going to be disagreeing on points like this. But the Americans with Disabilities Act covers people who are addicts, but who are not actively using.
You know, it's interesting. It's kind of like the same-sex marriage thing. You know, the Ninth Circuit ruled one way, Sixth Circuit ruled another way. The same thing on these workplace marijuana use. They're being dealt with at circuit court level. I don't know if we have to move to the Supreme Court level or not. And it's really interesting. If any of you ever have the time to look at the history of how marijuana got moved into Schedule I. It's just one particular person convinced countries, you know, in the early '60s to do this. Before, you know that the original colonies in America, that's all they did was grow hemp for the British Navy ships. So I mean, you know, it's just really interesting to see how some people's attitudes just can change a whole scope. I mean, the easiest solution for all of this is to make it a Schedule II drug. Then we don't have to worry about anything. Just get the pharmacies to buy it. Docs to write the scripts. But right now, you know, there's still a lot that we need to work out with Andy's group and, you know, concerns about workplace use. You know, that's why we're going to have this series of stakeholder meetings.
Thank you. Piggybacking on that, because it was mentioned multiple times that marijuana is still an illegal drug. This is kind of they have a multiple part question. What are the implications of licensed doctors giving a prescription for medical marijuana? Will the government of Guam implementing medical marijuana suffer any implications with receiving federal funding? And if the local government does implement its own adjustments to workplace laws, drug-free laws, in concert with the medical marijuana program, will that be in direct conflict with federal laws regarding the same? And to piggyback off of that, what is the Guam Medical Association's role involved with the advisory board in terms of prescriptions and them being certified to give out prescriptions? It's kind of it's a big question.
I'll take the first part of that. Right now, there have been court cases in the states that have approved marijuana for medical purposes. And actually, there's a case before the Supreme Court of Colorado that's approved marijuana for recreational purposes. Right now, the consensus of the courts is you've got to comply with state law as well as federal law. And federal law right now says it's an illegal drug. So those cases that have gone to court where persons have filed suit because they've been discharged or adversely affected in their employment by decisions regarding marijuana, the courts have decided with the employer. That's the way it stands now.
No physician can write a prescription of Schedule 1 drug. That's why they have the certification process. Just put in the medical record, and somehow that also gets transmitted to us. That patient the condition may be improved by the use of marijuana. So it's a certification, not a script. That's how they get it. Most states have gotten around that.
And whoever has the time card, this is going to be short. There have been statements made by the Department of Justice that their intention is not to prosecute people in possession of medical marijuana for medical purposes. And so in keeping with the law that we just passed here a few months ago, and that statement from the Department of Justice, my understanding is that there wouldn't be any changes whatsoever in the amount of federal funding that could be received by Guam because we have that law here. Now, someone who's in possession of large amounts of medical marijuana and it appears that they're deferring it, that's a whole different story, and that will be prosecuted. But finally, and I don't speak, I'm a member of both, but I don't speak for either the Guam Medical Association or the Guam Medical Society. But my sense is that most physicians on island are afraid to get involved in this because they're afraid that people are going to be coming, banging down their doors, wanting to receive that statement that medical marijuana may be beneficial for them, and it isn't a population they feel comfortable working with or feel they know enough about. And my understanding is that both groups have gone on the record opposing the law and opposing its implementation here. That any provider who's going to be doing the assessments and writing out the statement saying medical marijuana might help someone is going to need to undergo training about pharmacology, about addiction, about marijuana specifically, about how marijuana helps different conditions, and also about safety, risks, signs of addiction, we refer to if you think addiction is suspected, and all that other kind of stuff. So there's probably no doctor on island who would be in a position as of this moment to issue statements like that until the further training.
We have what's known in the medical profession as seekers already for pain medication. So it's nothing that doctors haven't dealt with before. What some physicians have raised as a concern is, and for whatever reason, they have the right to not want to write the certifications. You can't make them. So those doctors are concerned about any malpractice that may arise out of their refusal to write certifications. And there are probably some who may even be concerned about writing the certification, and then somebody comes to an untimely end or something happens to them, you know, what we can do about the malpractice issue here. That's something we can consider, we have to talk about, okay? Because it is valid. But I think the other part about this is, I don't know how we're going to train. If the doctors who really want to do this or are willing to consider it, I think we're probably going to have to do some of that stuff for them in terms of the patient education. Give you know, all of the information in sheets of paper that we discuss with the patient. They should sign off that they've been informed or they've got informed consent, whatever it's going to take. Because none of these doctors are going to go back to school just for medical marijuana. Okay, so we're going to, you know, we're going to assist as many as possible to do this. There's some who absolutely won't do it, and some who will be, you know, more than willing to do it. So we'll see what happens.
Thank you. The next question is another, well, it's an audience question and a class question put together. I'm particularly on the board, you put the $500, 5 ounces. The audience was asking how did we arrive at those figures? And then to add on to that from the students is, with the $500 and whatever potential tax revenue is generated, has there been discussions as to how that tax revenue is going to be allocated?
The 500 is kind of arbitrary, but that's kind of what I hear the analysis is going for. I don't know, if it's 250, so we'll reduce it by half. And what I'd like to be able to do is get it to the patient at the lowest cost possible. So if it's 250, that's great. But what we'd like to see is, okay, and this is why we need all of these stakeholders involved. We need revenue tax to agree to give us a 4% GRT, to give maybe add on a 5% tax, so that we get that, so we can run our program. And also it allows us to build up our Healthy Futures Fund, so we can help people who may have addiction problems. Because that's what Arizona has done. They've got $8 million in the bank, and what they do is they put that into other programs. So there is some benefit to this if we can get the revenue. And hopefully our friends Hessler are not going to use that money for anything else other than what we asked them to use it for.
Thank you. Okay. This is a question, I'm assuming it's from a parent. What is the procedure, possible procedure for parents who are interested in having their child or children be a part or get a prescription or a certification for medical marijuana if their child is diagnosed with one of the identified conditions?
Provision in the law and in the regulations for caretaker status, so the parents would actually be the caretaker. And I think some of that, when we're talking about the low THC level, that's why we really need the science here to get that out, because children with those seizure disorders are the ones who really can benefit from that. So that's probably one of the first things we'll do is find the distributor with the capability to produce that product in a laboratory here that can verify that indeed it is legitimate.
Thank you. Next question. Can anyone enlighten us on any efforts to take marijuana out of Schedule 1 as a Schedule 1 substance, controlled substance?
Actually, there was a bill introduced in the Senate in March where they tried to reduce this effect or reclassify it and otherwise open the door for medical marijuana. And what the status is of the bill at this time, I don't know. The Senate, meaning the U.S. Senate.
Thank you. Next question. With current HIPAA laws as well as employer laws in place, will all public school employees, like teachers, bus drivers, etc., be required to register or notify their employer for the children's safety? If so, will that information be made available to the parent of that child? This is a question from the audience. So I guess the gist of the question is, there's current, I guess, patient protection laws about what information about your medical history can be shared, and if this happens for children's safety as a parent, should they be able to know that their teacher or their school aide or their bus driver is on a prescription for medicinal marijuana?
HIPAA is very specific. Fines are very heavy for disclosing that kind of information. But I think one, school bus driver is not going to be driving a bus there using medical marijuana. They're going to, again, a lot of these workplace problems need to be dealt with at the stakeholder level, okay, and input during the public hearings. But yeah, patient confidentiality is the key. We can't just be giving people information on patients. So, like I said, this is a $25,000 fine first incident for every day thereafter. So I think it's just the person's right to be protected. But we have to work out those sensitive issues. I don't think anybody's going to want to have a bus driver who probably needs the product you know, they may not be under the influence, but you know, public perceptions can be, well, they're using marijuana for their condition. We don't want them driving the bus. So again, the science, okay, again, marijuana stays in your system for quite a bit of time, especially if it's in fatty deposits. You test positive, but you're really not. So, you know, a lot of that science is just going to be like the police. If they really have to test for driving while impaired or driving under the influence, we need to get them the testing equipment if they suspect that it's marijuana, because there's no simple breathalyzer right now for that. So a lot of things, like I said, we talked about the ripples in that pool. And you just keep dropping stones in there, and the ripples are all over the place. There's a lot we still have to work out.
As far as HIPAA goes, and as far as children go, there is legislation, statute that physicians need to follow, and I suspect other healthcare professionals as well. If there is suspected neglect, abuse, or otherwise maltreatment of a child, suspected, reasonably suspected, or of an older person, narco, that must be reported. It's actually an ethical violation in illegal if there is suspected neglect or abuse of a child of narcotic or narco, not to report it to the authorities. So that's the first issue. So if a child is getting into somebody else's medical marijuana, this isn't exactly the question that was asked, but it's worth mentioning. It must be reported. Secondly, as far as HIPAA, there are children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder who are prescribed controlled substances, Adderall, Ritalin, Dexedrine, and it's pretty common that they need to take a dose in the middle of the day. And so it's not construed as violating HIPAA law to give the teacher or the principal or the school nurse usually, the midday dose to administer to the child. That's considered part of care. Now, necessarily the diagnosis doesn't have to be revealed, but it can be concluded from what the medicine is. And back one question, while other people were talking about the issues having to do with HIPAA, I found online the bipartisan bill that was introduced about a month ago into the House. It's now Senate to reclassify marijuana from non-prescribable Schedule 1. Schedule 1 is things that don't have a medical use. So LSD, PCP, those kinds of things are Schedule 1 to Schedule 2. And that would change this whole discussion because it would no longer be an illegal substance federally. And people could just go to Colorado or Massachusetts and buy their own and bring it back. So we wouldn't have to do everything here. And probably because those other places are bigger, the prices would be lower. But the bill is active, it's being discussed. I think it's still in committee, but it's both in the U.S. House and the U.S. Senate.
Thank you. The next question is a public safety question. As we all know, there's a black market of illegal marijuana that's grown, sold on Guam, which is a crime for recreational use. What are GPD's efforts to, let's say, crack down on now? We're adding a new dimension to it on illegally or unlicensed growers of medicinal marijuana, or they're not following the law. And this is an audience add-on to that. Are there any projected costs or additional training needs or additional funding needs or operational needs of the department? The Guam Police Department.
The Guam Police Department, of course, our programs, we've invested in canine drug detection dogs, and the result of really, beefing up our operations to address the drug threat. The drug threat on Guam is really, the biggest problem is crystal meth. But certainly there have been some arrests, that have been made in terms of possession of marijuana, and then also individuals actually dealing with marijuana. We work with other federal agencies on that. I think, when we look at the cost, how do we get back to the cost in terms of our investment in our enforcement operations? I think we've gotten federal grants from Edward Burns, because that reduces violence, and also substance abuse, right? But at the same time, we also have a actual asset forfeiture sharing program with the feds. So if anyone is distributing illegal drugs and anything that is drug related, it doesn't have to be the Guam Police Department. Any of the law enforcement agencies that are involved in that case, federal law enforcement agency can adopt that case. And the assets that were used in those drug activities, whether it was money laundered or all the cash and assets, would be subjected to the forfeiture. So that's how we recover a lot of the costs. And the priority, of course, of the Guam Police Department in terms of the drug enforcement right now has really been looking at the most dangerous drugs that we have on our island, everything from crystal meth, to there have been some information, of course, that comes to the police department of cocaine and and the specifically stuff, but it's mainly crystal meth, and but we'll continue to be paying attention to all these other instances of illegal distribution of marijuana, especially if it's starting to get into the schools and affecting our children. I think that's just the most important thing that's on our radar, making sure that that attention is given. So again, there are costs with doing drug operations, but we're regaining it back through asset sharing programs and local asset sharing law that's in existence right now that we're working with the Attorney General's office on.
Thank you. A question just came up, going along the lines of that. Does Guam have the capacity to enforce and regulate and investigate these new rules and regulations? So basically, is the government trying to work on building capacity to enforce these laws?
I believe, our administration right now, we're looking at a multidisciplinary approach and how we're going to be addressing the complexity of understanding that you might have importation of illegal drugs, marijuana, but at the same time, we're in a community that's looking at right now and has a law passed to move toward medicinal use of marijuana. Not recreational use that doesn't, that would make it a little bit more complex, but medicinal use. So I think that's where I think our administration, in terms of using this multidisciplinary approach and having Jim and the advisory council, formed to look at some of the regulations, but at the same time, our multidisciplinary approach from the Guam Police Department is, working with the Criminal Justice Strike Force, working with the federal task force that we have, which provides those assets and provides us that support when it comes down to addressing what would be potentially the biggest major drug threats for Guam, which is again crystal meth is what's on our radar.
Thank you. The next question, it's more of a medical question. Is it possible to determine if someone is able to get off of medicinal marijuana, or can that even be determined once they get put on it?
That's actually one of the questions that was emailed to me in advance. And although marijuana is listed in the American Psychiatric Association's Diagnostic and Statistical Manual as a drug of use, there's very little in the way of documented withdrawal syndrome from it. And so in terms of the potential suffering of someone who's on it, getting off it is not difficult. Like any medicine that is a long-term medicine, and for something like pain, antibiotics we take for a short time, a week, 10 days, that's the end. Some medicines are longer term, pain medicines, medicines for high blood pressure, medicines for diabetes. Gout medicines, some are long term, some are short term. So for a child with difficult, hard to treat, untreatable so far seizures, the way to know when, if they're ready to get off medical marijuana that's prescribed for them for those seizures is to keep a log of how the seizures are going. And when you get below a critical threshold of a certain number of seizures in a defined period of time, or the intensity of the seizures as they occur, or if the person is able to function more satisfactorily in the school environment, because that's the whole point of treating kids. You want them to do well in school and ensure their future. You don't want them to be absent. You don't want them to be in the middle of a seizure and not paying attention, learning what they're supposed to learn. Some seizures can cause acting out in very odd ways. Many children who have seizure disorders outgrow them. Not all do. There are adults who have seizure disorders that they've had since they were children. But the way you know is that you track it and you work with the family and the teachers and the child who has some say and very important information to impart. And you decide if you want to take what's called a drug holiday, and then you keep a log of how the child or adult or whoever's on medical marijuana is doing off the medical marijuana. It has the pain returned, have the spasms returned, have the bad memories from post-traumatic stress disorder returned, have the seizures returned. It's pretty much like stopping any long-term medicine is you have to look at all the parameters you're trying to fix. And you have to risk-benefit analyze any side effects that might be occurring and decide at that moment what the right decision is for the patient with as much information as you have.
Thank you. Next question. This is an audience-generated question. Basically, they're asking if the draft rules already have a recommended prescription quantity of marijuana, and if not, what is Arizona's current prescription amount that they can carry?
2.5 ounces every 2 weeks. And the patient may, at their option, be given a 3-month supply. That's almost a pound of marijuana. Or its equivalent. Right now, the only thing we know is what the equivalent to 2.5 ounces are. So we have that laboratory's expertise.
Thank you. Next question. This question, I think we're piggybacking off of the multi-jurisdictional disciplinary approach, and the audience came up with a question of matter of concern, a few actually. Has the multidisciplinary task force and panelists and just that overall approach of the administration that has been assembled looked into the struggles or identified issues with either the current plan or maybe issues that other states have had so that we can mitigate those concerns? And also, given that government change every 4 years or 8 years and the leaders our public leaders change, are there systems in place to kind of keep the trajectory going in the same direction, or not that we're going to have a big shift if leadership does change?
I think we don't even ask about 8 years or 4 years. 2 years from now, they're going to have a new president, and they're going to have an attorney general. That may change everything, especially if they're we just have to wait and see. If somebody wants to take the chance to invest in these things. But I think again, what I said up there at the podium, the trains left the station. I mean, 26 states, territories. I mean, I don't see this changing, and I don't even if the governor here had a different way of dealing with this or wanted to change it, I don't think the legislature would do this. I mean, we're talking about trying to deal with people in pain who have not had that pain successfully handled through traditional medicine. I don't mean style medicine, I mean conventional Western medicine. So I think that the chance of this going away, not going to happen.
Thank you. The next question, there are a few questions of a medical nature, so I'm sorry, Dr. Post, who stepped out. Okay, and then we will move on to a different question. So she comes back. Okay. We did invite the Attorney General. Unfortunately, she wasn't able to make it as well, or a representative from office was unable to attend. But a question did just come up regarding the role of the AG's office in the formulation of these rules by the panel. Let me just read it verbatim. What is the role of the Attorney General's office in the formation of these rules and regulations by this panel? The meticulous way in which these rules are approached, evidenced by the impaneling of professionals such as yourselves. I can, okay, and then I guess I can foresee an extensive review by the AG could potentially render some of these efforts moot. Would it be prudent of this panel to consider inclusion of the AG's office in the creation of these rules?
I think in the adjudication process, they might have some role to play. We have some questions about some of the language in the law already that we're asking for opinion. And with this Attorney General, I think we'll get a really quick response. But I don't think they need to be involved in every phase of this, every step. It's thought through. It's been deliberated on the floor of the legislature, and it's been decided by the people of Guam that this is going to happen. There's nothing in this that's illegal or conflicts with any Guam law. I don't see the AG getting extensively involved in this unless we just ask for technical assistance.
Thank you. Next question. Now that Dr. Post is back, because she stepped out when I was going to ask her a question, and then it made me look foolish. But anyway, a few audience members brought up a few questions. I'll just ask them both at one time, and you can answer both, one or neither of them if you don't have the answer. Can you please enlighten us regarding the body's natural endocannabinoid system and how cannabis fits in? And the next question is basically, someone saw a documentary that marijuana can help the neurons and help prevent Alzheimer's. Do you have a take on that?
Answering that question completely could be a whole lecture, but simply, the Alzheimer's research I've seen is not conclusive, so I don't know for sure if it helps the symptoms, if it helps prevent, or if it does nothing at all. It is known about cannabis, which I'm going to call it because that's the name of the plant. It is known about cannabis and the human brain, which, as you know, is very complex, more complex than any computer likely to be built in any of our lifetimes. Seems predisposed to interact with cannabis. There are receptors in the brain that don't. Does everyone know what a receptor is? You know, it's how the chemicals that are the neurotransmitters communicate from brain cell, from neuron to neuron, and many other kinds of brain cells. It is known that there are, in every human brain, naturally occurring cannabinoid receptors that don't interact with cocaine or methamphetamine or Valium or opiates. They only interact with cannabinoids. So it seems as if long, long ago, probably thousands of years ago, maybe tens of thousands, cannabis was a regular part of human consumption, or there wouldn't be these receptors made for it. And as it happens, there are two basic ones, CB1 and CB2. And if you remember way back at the beginning of this, I told you about the different kinds of cannabis. There's one kind that gives people energy and it makes people feel trippy, and sometimes there are hallucinations and paranoia can go along with it. That one seems to interact with CB1. And one of the earlier questions that was asked, which is about the cannabidiol, seems to interact with CB2. And so the endocannabinoid system is something that's present in all humans, which lends support for the thinking that cannabis is psychosis. It can reduce fear and panic in people who have gone through traumatic experiences. It certainly reduces pain. What it doesn't do is cause hallucinations, so the kind that we're going to be looking at does not cause hallucinations. You don't get stoned and high on it. There's not a euphoria. There's not visual hallucinations. It does have an appetite stimulating component, which is a good thing because many people who are very sick have no appetite. But anyone who's wanting to try this kind of medical marijuana to get high and have fun is going to be sorely disappointed. So there may be less diversion than we think, but the endocannabinoid system is part of the brain that we are all born with, and it's unique. And it means that our brains are predisposed to interact with cannabis. I'm not sure all of what that means, but there's sociological, psychological, medical ramifications of all of it.
Thank you. The next question is, actually before that, just be aware that we thank you so much for your questions. They're actually, I think, they're not better than the questions we came up with. They're just as good. But anyway, we're gonna stop accepting questions at 1:10. We have a few questions we want to get through, and we don't want to keep our panelists up here for too long. They've been very, very open to discussing a lot of the broad scope of things we had to talk about. So 1:10. So at 1:10, the lovely ladies will take every question that's out there, and then we'll try to get through as many as possible. So the next question is a two-parter. Basically, the question is as follows. One, will GovGuam employees who are MMJ patients be subject to adverse action? And two, how will the Guam Bar deal with attorneys who are MMJ patients and their role in representing clients or as an advisor to clients? Well, two-parter.
Sure. Only the Guam Bar speaks for the Guam Bar. So there are ethical rules that apply to all attorneys, and that'll be how the Guam Bar will deal with the Guam Bar. And then will GovGuam employees be subject to disciplinary action? I think that, as we discussed earlier, does GovGuam need to revisit its workplace rules and its protections under civil service? That's something that has to be discussed at greater length as we go through this process. So it's kind of premature at this point to say whether or not something will definitely happen in the future.
Thank you. The next question. I do know that the method of growing and who's going to grow and sell and be the distributor that's a very contentious issue. We have a lot of questions that have come in on that. One of the questions that the class did come up with was, is Department of Health, Public Health and Human, DPHSS, looking at a purely vertical, as in person seed to point of sale, as in one person grows it, manufactures it, sells it. And there's a lot of very, I guess, passion about this aspect of the program. And I think people on the panel are trying to hear about that aspect. So I'm throwing it out there and for you guys.
Yeah, $90 million worth of passion. We haven't, we really haven't thought about it, from seed to patient straight through. We're looking at probably a producer, maybe a manufacturer, and then a distributor, or a combination of that. And so that involves at least 2 licenses, maybe 3. Okay. And so people have asked how we see it working. We're probably going to have an application process that's going to require whatever, whether it's going to be vertical, whether it's going to be segmented. All of the people that are going to be in this business are going to need to be fingerprinted, FBI background checks, all the things we need to do to make sure we've got people pretty much on the up and up, although we don't know who else might be financing some of this, but we'll do our best to keep it as clean as we can. Then, depending upon the number that the task group and the stakeholders think is a workable number, if we have applicants who exceed that number, we'll probably do it the same way Arizona did. We'll have a lottery. Okay. Because we don't want to get involved in whose application is better than somebody else's, because we know what happens when you start people getting protests, like we have with GTA and their transportation and some of these other things. So we want to make it, say, look, all of you have an equal chance, but we're only going to have X. If they're more than X, then it's going to be up to the little ping pong ball with the number on it. It's going to tell you whether or not you have an application, because we'll assume that everybody is equal.
Thank you. Our next question is, Mr. Saban, you mentioned about Department of Agriculture's role in advising on growing and cultivation and giving sort of your personal advice on that. Will the Department of Agriculture be actively involved in site inspections or in concert maybe with the Department of Public Health? The class came up with a lot of questions on the agency interaction with that.
Yes, I'm pretty sure Public Health and Agriculture will collaborate on an SOP as far as security. As far as site inspection, we do have our conservation officers that we can, as needed, basis do a spot inspection, i.e. Facility, and even the monitoring, interior monitoring of the propagation of the plant. But yes, in accordance to whatever SOP that is created. So we will be assisting Public Health with the site inspection.
Thank you. The next question, I'm not sure if anyone on the panel can speak to it, but someone from the audience asked it, so I will pose it to you. Would educators on island have to adjust their performance or grading criteria if they have a student with a certifiable illness and they are taking medical marijuana?
I have a list right now of 14 potential stakeholders that we're going to be dealing with, and DOE is one of them. So that'll be a question that will be dealt with.
Thank you. DOE, the superintendent was invited, and unfortunately he was unable to attend as well. Or he's off island, I believe, so he was invited. Next question. There's a big talk about medical tourism, just in general, and now with medicinal marijuana, that talk has increased. Is the advisory board or anyone discussing the possible benefits and non-benefits and implications of medical marijuana tourism?
Yes.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. Okay.
Can I answer that, the one of the
Yes.
tourism? Yeah, because we've had a problem also in organized crime, such as Yakuza and, Asian organized crime, organizations in this region from Hawaii, and this particular portion. And some of the things, of course, that they're very sophisticated in some of the type of exploiting some of the gaps and security gaps in the Pacific Island region. One of the things that is most likely they would always look at, is are there security, are our laws in place that are solid, especially Guam changing with this, to exploit and counterfeit medicinal marijuana, counterfeit. There's North Korea has had, there's information that they distribute ecstasy. Some of the non-state actors in the Southeast Asian region to look at ways to profit. So these are some of the kind of things too that I think our island has to consider too, and that our law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and security people who are at the airport are all going to be monitoring and ensuring that nothing gets exploited from people that are coming from those tourism markets. As we talked about the benefit of tourism, it's our bread and butter, but at the same time, there's some nefarious actors that are out there too who will want to try and exploit, the current changes taking place with the medicinal use and the actions that are taking place with the advisory board. I think there'll be some of that kind of discussion, sure.
Thank you. The next question. I know a lot of our discussion today, we talked about we're still getting this thing going. We're still working on it. We're going to have public hearings and public input. But someone did ask the question of how will producers be approved, regulated, in growing, packaging, and distributing medical marijuana? Or if you don't have that right now, you can just say that.
The rules and regulations are still being developed.
Thank you. Next question. One of the members of the class asked, will there be a distinction or whether it's just a form or in practice of someone who is able to smoke medical marijuana, or if there's going to be different applications of taking medical marijuana, will there be distinctions in how an individual goes about to get that certification and dosage?
I don't think I understand it. If you're eligible, you have an eligible condition, and we've already agreed that what the dosage levels are, and that can get more sophisticated because maybe get to the point where if you have condition X, you're the most effective. It's either more or less than 2.5 ounces. So as we go along, there may be those distinctions by disease condition. So right now, we just treat everybody the same. It's 2.5 ounces or its equivalent. So we get stuff like water.
Okay, I think we've kind of run the gamut of the questions. We've had a lot of different questions, very different in scope. We got through most of the questions that the audience had, as well as many of the questions that the class had. I do want to thank, before we kind of close it out, I do want to at least afford an opportunity for anyone on the panel to say anything else if they would so like to say anything else before we get to the closing remarks.
How many students here, this is part of their master's part, right? This is how you get your degree. Or at least part of it, right? Okay? Who are you? Just here? Okay. You know what? You did a great job. This is topical, okay? Very important, okay? From a public administration standpoint, how you're going to manage these things. Absolutely great. And, you know, it's just a continuation of what we did last year, but it's now that it's really here, it's got more substance. And as you go along, think about this as almost like a case study for you. This is the development of a program that's going to affect a lot of people's lives. It may affect our economy in a great way, especially if there is a way, a mechanism to do, clean and proper medical tourism. Okay. This is a great boost, a great opportunity for Guam to grow an economy based on something other than the military. So, thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for those kind words. I would like to remind everyone, please, there's a survey that was passed around. Please, we would really, really appreciate it if everybody would complete it. There will be going around to take it. And don't forget, there's a lot of food, there's drinks over there, room 150. Please come over there and talk to us and get to know us. But before you leave, come on. On the bottom here, Professor Ron McNinch is here. He's going to make a few closing remarks. We invited him because we love him. Without further ado, one last thing. I know we got several questions regarding recreational use of medicinal marijuana. We decided as a class to not necessarily discuss that at this time. As the panel has spoken, there's a lot of very important issues to discuss regarding medicinal marijuana and the medical marijuana program. We have several months to get through this very important step. And as a class, we didn't want to kind of put it all together and kind of lose the focus of this singular event. So I appreciate your guys' questions on that, but we will deal with that maybe next year, the next class can do that for me. But this was enough work for our class for this forum. And with that, I give you Dr. Minute.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I wasn't in the room. I was listening in the separate room because the food's so good over there. Okay, and so I had a wonderful time. Welcome everyone to this wonderful event because I get to give the closing, and my closings are always very brief. But I have to say, congratulations to Professor Uggett and his wonderful students on a great event once again. And let's all give Professor Uggett a hand. Ladies and gentlemen, we have 180 college professors here on campus, and year in, year out, semester in, semester out, Professor Uggett puts on the best public conferences you can imagine. Let's do one hand. And graduate students and students, absolutely wonderful conference. I always learn a lot at these events, and we can't do this without certainly our wonderful panelists that served here with us today and discuss their views. And you know, one thing about an issue like medical marijuana is not everyone's going to agree, not everyone's going to have views that are compatible with our own views. And certainly guests in the audience and guests certainly on internet, and I checked the internet link, it works great. You know, I think that we can all have wonderful things to discuss. Ladies and gentlemen, this conversation is happening in this room. This room is supposed to be a law school room. It's supposed to be a contract law lecture room, and that's what we asked for when we had a school of business with a legal studies department in it, that maybe in the next few years we'll have a law school here. And Guam now has a capacity to do that maybe in the near future. And I want to say one thing. This discussion is happening here because on this campus and in this room and in this building, we have academic freedom. And we talk about the hard subjects. and we talk about unpopular subjects, subjects that make people mad at us or want to argue with us. That's why you have a university. You have a university to talk about these hard things and to argue back and forth. And argument and polite, disagreement is at the heart of knowledge. It's because we get angry at what people have to say that we think, and because we think that we change. And the only way we can change things is if we think about them. And that's why being here and being at a university is so important. And that's why I'm so proud of these graduate students today. And I'm so proud of Professor Uggen for putting on this wonderful conference. I want to point out that this discussion happened here today because medical marijuana had a process champion. That's what we call the public administration. Medical marijuana had a person willing to stand up in the legislature of all places and say, this is an idea. And that's Senator Tina Munoz Barnes. Is she here today? We should give her a hand too. Absolutely. We wouldn't be here today without her stirring things up a little bit. And by the way, we have another gentleman in the office who stirs things up all the time also on really neat policy areas, and that's Senator DJ Cruz as well. Now, one of my other favorite senators is here in the audience too, and that's Senator Jim Espinosa, but he's back again, so hasn't done anything too much yet. All right, I'm missing the senators home. But wonderful. Ladies and gentlemen, I know I'm not supposed to give long concluding remarks, but I want to tell you, academic freedom and provoking thought is alive and well here at the University of Guam. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay. Thanks for that. I don't really want to forget that. I didn't really want that much. Huh? Oh, no. Thanks for inviting me. That's what I want to do.